Hello, everyone. First of all, disclosures. I've been a tobacco harm reduction advocate for 25 years, since I first met Martin Jarvis. No conflicts of interest. Final disclosure, I'm feeling a bit nervous because of the awesomeness of the preceding 5 presentations, which I thought were just great. Yeah, damn right. Okay, I'm just going to put up a few propositions that I hope will help inform the discussion and the debate, along with everything else we've heard. First of all, people like nicotine. Shock, something that cannot be discussed. I've gone to the Idiot's Guide to the Brain to research this and found that receptors, dopamine, rewarding psychoactive effects, okay? What are these effects? What are these rewards and why are they valuable? Here's Neil Benovitz on the subject, probably the world's foremost expert. And he says, to pick these out, he says, stimulation and pleasure reduces stress and anxiety, valuable for mood control in some people. Okay, that sounds useful. Let's go to Paul Newhouse. He stresses cognitive improvements, helps with performance of potentially cognitively demanding tasks, enhances working memory. Maybe for some kids, there's some benefits for people suffering with attention deficit disorder. And here, research finding improvements in cognitive performance amongst people with ADHD. And then finally, my example, people with psychosis maybe has a regulating effect and useful in the treatment, potentially useful in the treatment of schizophrenia, and why patients may be self-medicating. And perhaps that explains why smoking rates are so high in people with psychosis. There's more of this stuff out there. Stuff on Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, weight control, even athletic performance, okay? So these are things that people get from the use of nicotine. I think we need to be honest about this, that there is a demand for these amongst certain people. Not everybody, but some people may find these things beneficial. We need to be realistic about that and recognize people are doing it for a reason, even if that eventually hardens into a dependence. Okay, the disappearing deterrent is my next point, okay? Now, we have spent years in tobacco control, not only warning people about the harms and being concerned about the harms, but the harms form a major deterrent to tobacco use. And, you know, this is the purpose of the warning. Smoking kills. It's going to do nasty things to you. Don't do it. Okay? And we've elaborated that into all kinds of communications on why you should not smoke. Okay? So I think it's important that we're moving now to a situation, this is probably one of the most famous quotes in the whole of tobacco harm reduction, and it leads us into the conclusion that the smoke-free products are really much less harmful. And we heard that from Anne and the team this morning, and we basically know that these products are substantially less harmful. What does that mean for the deterrent? That's the question I'm going to put here. We know it from, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We know it from biomarker data. I'm not going to go into this, but this is the core of the fantastic review that was done by the team at King's and all their helpers, and the systematic review that led them to the important conclusion that vaping poses a small fraction of the risk. Now, that's a fact. Where is the deterrent now to using nicotine if there's only a small fraction of the risk? Most, if not all of those risks will have gone. There's not really that much there to stop you using nicotine if you think there's a benefit from using it. Now, we also know that when smokers give their reasons for why they quit smoking, in other words, it's not just I'm bored with it, it's mostly, and the ones in red, are something to do with health, current, future health problems, recommendations from doctors, concern from the family. Economic cost brings up another thing, which is policies that we've put in place to address the harm by making the products more expensive. Okay, so harm plays a major role in suppressing the demand for nicotine because it's in the form of smoking. Also, policies put in place, and I mentioned tobacco, but those policies to control use of the product are predicated on harm. we put the policies in place not just for fun, but because it was causing an enormous burden of cancer, heart disease, and COPD. That's the justification and the underlying basis for those policies. So the question we have to face is, what if there is now minimal harm, or if you like, harm that's in the noise of normal risks that we happily tolerate in society associated with nicotine use? So I'll answer that question briefly. I think there is a demand for nicotine, but there is also a latent demand that has been suppressed by the costs and burdens of harm, which will now be lifted, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see more nicotine use in society over time. Third point, is nicotine addictive? So a lot of people, you say, well, there's not much harm. They'll go, but it's addictive, as if that's like the sort of winning point, okay? First of all, what do we mean by addiction? Everyone should be precise about definitions here, not just toss around words that they've just, mean whatever they want them to mean. You have to be actually precise. Okay, so let me pick on 4 definitions here that I've just picked up. You can find many definitions like this, but I tell you what, they all have one thing in common. Okay, they're all something to do with adverse consequences, takes over their life, substance use despite harmful consequences, harmful physical, psychological and social effects, main priority regardless of harm. There's a harm story here in all of these definitions. It's you carry on doing something even though it's hurting you. Right, but I'm now going to go to the actual official definitions. I want to just give a massive plug to this. Sharon, Robert, the addiction ontology, a serious attempt to codify the language that's used in this field, so we all know what we're talking about instead of talking at cross purposes all the time. And the addiction definition is really interesting. Here we go, because you can't read it. Essentially a compulsive behavior. But look at the final line there, where the behavior results in risk or occurrence of serious net harm. That's an addiction. Even more interesting is the accompanying commentary on this, which is down at the bottom, which says the reason we call it an addiction is to limit, the reason we stress harm is to limit it to the class of things that merit a treatment and public health response. Now, there's a corollary there. If there isn't additional harm, then there isn't necessarily a rationale for a treatment and public health response in the same sort of way. And it's not that we don't have a word for describing what nicotine does, but that is substance dependence, impaired functioning following reduction or termination of use. These definitions are really important, in my opinion, and we should understand them and use them. We also should take much more care when we use stigmatizing labels like addiction. It is a loaded term, and it must be used carefully, and in my view, if possible, not at all. So I think what I'm trying to get around to saying here is that I think nicotine should join the list of socially acceptable psychoactive substances like caffeine, like moderate consumption of alcohol, and increasingly like cannabinoids. Okay, we don't lose our minds when young people have a drink under the age of 18 or take coffee under the age of 18. We don't necessarily ask kind of idiot questions. When somebody brings out a new, a new craft beer, we don't ask the question, is this appropriate for the protection of public health? Because it's not a thing with beer. It's a drug. It's not intended to be for the protection of public health. It's there for enjoyment and its functional benefits. And here's a great quote from Mike Russell. There's no compelling objection to the recreational, even addictive use of nicotine, provided it's not shown to be physically, psychological, socially harmful. Maybe we should just get used to the idea people like nicotine, it has benefits, and we should worry only to the extent there is harm associated with the delivery system. Adolescence and nicotine, I'm on it. Okay, so this is what happened in the United States. Boom, triggered a moral panic. Okay, vaping went up to 27.5%, but I think there's a better way of understanding this, which is to split the vaping into infrequent and frequent vaping, which is much lower. The infrequent vaping, this is the followers of Kim Kardashian, basically. This is the people who are doing it because it's a bit of a laugh and celebrities are doing it. Down here, this is people, the more frequent vapors, people more committed to vaping, likely to be cigarette users in the counterfactual scenario, and they're the ones we should be interested in. So you've got what I would think of as a kind of frothy fad sitting on top of a substance use behavior. The two behaviors need to be conceptually treated separately. The top is experimental, probably transient, not particularly interesting from a public health point of view. The frequent vaping, that's probably beneficial because it's displacing smoking. So although there's a massive crisis about youth vaping, you have an inconsequential use and then a beneficial use is probably the way to see it and explain it. I'm going to run out of time, it's a nightmare. Some comments here. I mean, these are well-meaning statements from prominent figures in the field, like Anne McNeil and Mitch Zeller. But in my view, I mean, I understand why they're saying these things, but in my view, they don't really make any sense, okay? I'm going to try and explain why. I mean, anyone who's never smoked from taking up vaping, does that mean if you want to take up nicotine, you should smoke first? Duh. You know, any use of nicotine by a kid. Kids have always done what adults do. They just do. That's what adolescence is. It's a transition from childhood to adulthood, and adolescents do what adults do. Got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to speed up a bit. Sorry, if I can. This is brilliant information from Norway, but look what happened here. A huge, rapid, massive decline in smoking amongst young women, but displaced by snus. Are we saying, Anne, that these women should have smoked before they took up snus, or are we happy to pocket the win from them no longer smoking? This is a similar thing happening in the United States. Okay, it's got this funny blip in it that the blue is vaping, the red is smoking. But there's the trend lines. We're seeing vaping essentially displacing smoking amongst people who want to use nicotine, and that trend would be even sharper if you focused only on frequent vaping. Drug use is pervasive. It's not restricted to nicotine. There's no moral panic about use of cannabis in the United States. Over 20% for the last 25 years, 5% daily use, okay? Drug use is a thing in society. It's just a phenomenon. Got it. Okay, and even nicotine use, although we've seen these changes, there is a slight trend downwards, but, it's still very prevalent as a whole. Right, and just thinking about kids, they really don't care what we think. They really, really don't. So when you get these statements, that's where they're at. Okay, and you can see that in the stuff coming from Francis and Jasmine and Sharon. Okay, so what we should be thinking about is where is their welfare? What do they need? What is the thing that most troubles them? And I tell you this, vaping is way down on the list of things that are afflicting that particular group. I'm nearly done. Okay, new conceptual framing here. Okay, again, Mike Russell, who is kind of a sort of intellectual mentor to many of us, I think. He said something I thought was really interesting. This is back in '91. This is how far ahead of the game this guy was. Not really about temporary aid to cessation. Okay, he said this: the potential as long-term alternatives to tobacco that makes the virtual elimination of tobacco a realistic future target. So he is talking here about what I would see as a kind of technology. I've got it. I'm winding up now. 3 epochs I would like. This is my final slide, so if I could. 3 epochs. Tobacco control, where we ask the question, how do we stop tobacco use and fight big tobacco? The second epoch, which I think started around 2000 with the interest in snus, probably go up to 2030. What I think of as the tobacco harm reduction era. How do we reduce harms caused by smoking? Okay, and now we've got a whole range of technologies now that have emerged to do that. But the final, concluding, and I think ultimate point here is where we come to terms with nicotine as a recreational drug in society, irrespective of smoking. It's a socially acceptable stimulant that people like to use. It's not just an alternative to smoking, as Maciek said earlier. It's a thing in society, and we need to actually manage it as that. Okay? So we're thinking about a major transition from one type of system to another. Thank you. That's my end.